You have the Yanks could give the Europeans some advice.
Yeah.
The euro, yeah, I got to give you a hard. The euro is almost at 133 again. Very contrary to you doing your victory lap from a few weeks ago. Do the Yanks really have something to tell the Europeans, or have the Europeans figured it out?
Well, I think when I called that the euro would go down, it was about 136, 137.
Yeah.
So we're still in the money.
Okay. Well, all I'm saying is pointing out that your notion that Europe would totally collapse has not come to fruition.
And secondly, I mean, the idea is for Europe is learn from our mistakes.
Right.
We don't really have something to tell them other than the fact that we rushed our bailouts, and Lord knows they're not Russian in Europe.
No,
we rushed our bailouts. We threw them together quickly, and we made mistakes, as you do when you create these kinds of things on the fly. And the idea is, Europe should learn from that. They should see, well, you know what? When you go back and what could the U.S. have done differently that we can do now? There are some very practical things. And first is, if you're going to bail out the banks, which is what's going to happen here, and give the taxpayers some sort of voice, give them voting shares, give the government power in these banks.
But didn't they? I thought in like the UK they took power, didn't they? I don't think that was totally ignored.
It wasn't totally ignored.
I mean, they basically took over, like I think RBS and Lloyd's Bank. And
right, but we're talking about, especially when we're talking about Greece, we're not really talking about Greece.
Right.
We're talking about a template for how all of these troubled, contagious regions like Portugal, Spain, Italy, how they're going to handle it.
You're arguing for almost more nationalization instead of this what I called sotto voce nationalization.
That's
which we
soft
had
voice.
That's soft voice for those of you who are. But basically, you're arguing for even a greater role.
Yeah, and I think it's especially necessary given that they're asking government employees and really everyone who depends on these economies to take such a hit. When we're talking about cutting wages, slashing these pensions, you're going to hurt these economies.
Right. So you're calling for equal distribution of the pain.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And the final thing is that tie some regulation to it. In other words, don't let these banks sit here and start, because we're talking about how much capital these banks need to have. And so don't sit there and let them push back and say, oh, well, we can put credit card debt as our core capital.
Right.
Don't let them pull that kind of stuff.
Don't let them pull the wool over the government's eyes, the regulators' eyes.
Exactly.
But I got to say something to you.
Okay.
I mean, the banks in Europe, they are very tied to the governments in the. I mean, they're much closer as instruments of social policy than they are in the U.S. I mean, if Angela Merkel really doesn't want Deutsche Bank or a couple of the large other German banks to do something, somebody at the Bundesbank, somebody picks up the phone and they call Joseph Ackerman and they say, listen, this is what we want to see happen.
Right.
I mean, it's much less likely you would see that in the U.S., for example.
Right, but I think at least, even from a symbolic perspective, having the governments have these voting, controlling, or at least these stakes where they can actually call the shots and say, look, we're gonna limit bonuses to a 3% increase.
10 seconds.
It's going to give the people a sense of ownership as opposed to creating divide within the nation over finances.
Divisiveness.